fierce compassion. We consciously intend remembering and restoring. We consciously accept responsibility for the continuance of life. We consciously intend transformation.
So, as we reflect on the seeds of wisdom that we have gathered from the ancestors this morning, how can we plant them to give them roots for future generations? So, now we will hear from Al Striplen, and Jana, will you do the introduction?
Yes, thank you. Al and I met very spiritually meant to be during the pandemic, and Spirit led us to both present in Rome, Italy, 2 years later with Dr. David Steinhorn, bringing forward flute and drum to unite the heartbeat of physicians from around the world at an integrative medicine conference. And so I now present to you my dear friend, Al Striplen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here to join you in your efforts. And because drum and flute are very central to Jana's efforts and my efforts, I'd like to begin with just a very short flute presentation and use that as maybe a gathering of our vibrations, our balancing, and whatever that means to you in this brief presentation of flute. The flute came to me after I retired from work, actually, so it's very recent in my experience. And it has taken me lots and lots of places, as Jana mentioned. It's taken me to Rome, it's taken me to Stanford, and it's taken me to various places in California. And it also led me to writing children's books, all inspired by the flute. And so it's become a very central part of my life. Currently, I'm a volunteer docent or interpreter at the State Indian Museum in Sacramento, Midtown in California, USA. And I'd like to share basically how I discovered the seeds that are in my ancestry, both from my mother's Mexican Aztec background and then in my father's Amah Mutsun Ohlone, California indigenous background. And of course, I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I thought I was looking for my father's side of the family, that part that I missed and didn't know anything about, except for my father's adoption papers saying that he was Indian. And so my search was to find out what that meant. I grew up my first 21 years in my mother's Mexican household, And she, of course, she didn't know her Aztec background because of the activities, colonizations, and revolutions in Mexico. And so as I began my search for my father's side of the family, the Amah Mutsun side, which is centered near Hollister, California, I was taken along a journey that I thought was genealogical, but really quickly became spiritual as I was invited to participate in many gatherings, some ceremonies at Mount Shasta, and meet various people who became my teachers. And my journey actually was discovering the seeds. This is why I was very interested in the title and the mission of your particular gathering here, because it seemed to fit me just ideally. What happened with me is that as I went further and further into Native American indigenous culture, many other parts of my past life kind of flaked off, things that didn't pertain to me anymore. And I quickly learned that those questions that people ask about journey, how do I know if I'm on the right path, and those kinds of questions, quickly began to reveal to me that I was on my journey. And the things that I learned were from not textbooks, but from word of mouth, from the elders, from shamans over the years. And it became much more than learning my genealogy, but more understanding the spiritual ways of humanity in general. Being that I spent a lot of time at the State Indian Museum in Sacramento, I had occasion to meet many people from all over the world. And as I learned along the way since 2009, and before that, journeying to different parts of the state and attending the gatherings at Mount Shasta for a dozen years, I began to understand the ceremonies that I had been walking by numerous times in the museum. And as I learned more, I shared more and found that what I was experiencing in Native American California culture was paralleled in some way in cultures all around the world. And basically I began to understand that indigenous experience and spirituality has parallels, similarities, and sometimes exactness in indigenous communities all over the world. So, for example, in the practice of doing land acknowledgements nowadays is very popular in the United States and elsewhere. I began to do land acknowledgements inclusive of everybody in the gathering that I happened to be at, so that we could recognize our indigenous land wherever we came from, since I believe that all of us come from an indigenous place, someplace in the world, and through that we have kind of a oneness in our human experience. So what's happened with me is, in terms of the seeds I discovered, I think can best be capsulized in the ceremonies that I've experienced here in Northern California or Central California. There, for example, are large obsidian blades that are used in one of the ceremonies that I'd like to use as an example. And the dancers say that those obsidian blades are used to cut the veil. So in Northern California, the dancers use those symbolically and physically, symbolically cutting the veil. And when they stomp the ground, they're kicking backwards, kicking the veil aside. The teaching basically, or the message is basically that there need not be any obstruction between our physical life expression and the rest of our soul or spirit with all that is, and what we might call the Great Spirit. And so as I learned further along those lines and visiting elders and shamans in Northern California and Nevada, that this is pretty much a universal teaching. And as I explained these things in the museum during my presentations and informal tours of the exhibits, I heard people who repeat to me, that's just like my religion teaches. And this particular man is Jehovah. And I was explaining some other aspects of the exhibits. And another man would say, that's just what we teach. And he's Muslim, Sufi. And there are others who shared that. I also happen to play the Hawaiian nose flute, which was gifted to me many years ago. And when I play that for the traditional Hawaiians who visit our museum, they greet me in their traditional way, touching foreheads and sharing breath with one another. And two men from Jordan said, that's kind of like our old people do. I've seen the old men lean towards each other, and I'm wondering if they're doing the same thing, sharing life force. And I spoke later on, months later, with an Israeli woman, and she said, that's true. I've seen them do that. So just over and over and over again, I've heard people comment on the similarities or exactness of the concepts that are taught in various indigenous communities all over the world, and in many spiritual ways too, and even some of the formal churches have a core of truth in them. So this has been my journey along the way, but more than that, it's become very personal. I learned that following the journey and asking, since we live on a free will planet, we're allowed to do whatever we want to do. And on the other side, where we say God or all that is, or whoever we believe the Creator is, there's no judgment of what we do. We create that with our own minds and our own societies and our own religions. And I understand too, some of this is foreign to a lot of different people, so I've learned to be careful and cautious of how I express my thoughts and my learnings with the variety of people I meet in the museum. But more to my surprise than not, people seem to understand. There are open hearts and open ears. There is an audience for this kind of message. And so I've become more bold and more confident in my presentations as I speak with the numerous people from all over the world that visit our museum.
What's that?
Is the strip too big?
A little, but if you did it any smaller, it would be too short.
Yeah.
Are we still good here?
Excuse me, can everyone please mute their microphones? We're getting some some voices coming through. Please mute your microphones. Thank you. Okay.
So,
Sorry
thank
about
you.
that.
That's okay. So this is basically the experience I've gained and the confidence I've learned in sharing the information that I've gathered over the past 35, 40 years. And what I'd like to do is switch the story a little bit before I run out of time here. And this takes me back to the flute. So I call this a transition a little bit. And what I'd like to use in this transition is a different kind of flute. And I know it's hard to see here, but this is a larger flute compared to the one we started with. This larger flute, it has a tradition that goes back, I'm told, 1,000 or more years in the Mayan and Aztec cultures. And it was called, and still is called, a temple flute, because the flute was played to help people transition into the spiritual dimensions. And so I'll play a little bit of this before I tell the rest of my story. hope you could hear that well enough. It's a dual flute, so you'll get parallel sounds on it. There are many different kinds of these flutes. And the reason I refer to this little break in my presentation as a transition, because it gets more personal with me in terms of what I've learned and my role being clarified in terms of my life on the planet. And it seems that because of the things I've learned and the places I've been able to visit, the message that I understand I'm to share is that we are in fact in those foretold times, those prophecy times, the transition of the planet. And the earth itself is transitioning along with humanity and all life on the planet. And so what I've learned is it's time to share. And communities in the indigenous worlds have often hidden away their teachings because they were fearful of it being lost or misconstrued or misinterpreted. And in reality, that has happened. But now many of those messages are coming back. Many of those people who understand channeling or their intuitive aha moments or their personal experiences, even near-death experiences, are bringing messages back into the world. And humanity appears to be prepared, or at least enough people on the planet seem to be prepared to hear these messages and to understand that this time that we're experiencing on Earth, the chaos of it all is basically the transition from the procession of the equinoxes and even before that, 1986, 87, to the time around 2030 and beyond. So we're experiencing what has always existed among humanity and the life on the planet. Those things are now being shown to us so that with higher consciousness we can understand and make the choice that these things cannot go into the new time. So we're being shown very bluntly all of these things. A lady, a spiritual leader in Ukraine,
Hey, George, come on.
said it in a way that I like to repeat. And she said that her people, the Ukrainian people, are acting as a beacon of light now that we have global communication almost instantaneously. We can see the stark contrast of dark and light. And she said, she advised, don't just look at the atrocities that are happening, look at what's happening because of it. There is a unification consciousness growing among the nations. And people are saying collectively, we don't want war anymore. It's a time to transition to peaceful things. Another man from the Inca area, when asked on a televised presentation in Spanish, was asked, how do you think things are going now? His name is Rolando Paucar, presents in Spanish. But his response to that question about how things are going now on the planet, how are people doing? And he leaned back in his chair and said, things are going perfectly. They're going wonderfully. Meaning that what's happening basically needs to happen. It needs to happen because we're going into the good times and people collectively will start understanding that and seeing that more clearly as we look beyond the chaos that we see on the news and all that. So those are the messages that I tried to share. And also in teaching meditation, I use the Native American medicine wheel as a foundation for my teachings and my energy work with reconnective healing. And so I think in meditation and the medicine wheel, the teaching of balance, self-healing, unlimited human potential, all of that I think is coming out now, and that's basically my message in terms of my communications with the community at large. So I'll stop there. If there are any questions, I can share some other things if you wish, but I'll stop right there.
If you have questions, can you please put them in the chat, and that would probably be the easiest way to communicate. But I have a question. we, knowing this information that we're going through these times that are very chaotic, do you have a sense of how the best way is for us to survive these times?
The common advice I've received and what I've learned, and basically what I try to practice myself, is to remember who we are, remember who I am personally, and that we are not helpless. The fact that we are here together in this gathering basically tells us we're old souls and we can handle this. And it's a process of remembering who we are and knowing that even sitting in the closet, sitting in our chair at home, that our expression of goodwill, the expansion of light that we are, recognizing that we have the creative source within us, and allowing that to be reflected through our life energy, that helps tremendously, and it attracts us to one another, but it also sheds light for the whole planet. I heard that in some of the Christian teachings, because I was raised Christian my first 21 years, they say that all we need is the faith the size of a mustard seed. And many of the spiritual people involved with spiritual circles say, we have far exceeded that in terms of goodwill and the expression of peace and love on the planet. The Hindu like to talk about, use the phrase namaste, or something like the God inside greets the God in me, greets the God in you. In Northern California, some of the indigenous people teach their children, when you meet a new person, look first at their spirit, and you will see a reflection of you and the Creator. So I think that kind of is a similar message. Like the examples I gave about sharing breath, sharing our life force, and recognizing we are that.
So, are there any more questions? Does anyone have a question for Al or a comment?
And by the way, I do have a website. I think it's on the poster earlier. So if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to take an email or a chat on my phone.
Okay, well, maybe we could end with another flute.
Sure, be happy to do that.
I have one thing to share. I just want to express my appreciation for what you've brought to this circle today as the first conversation, because it's so important for all of us to, I hear hope in what you're sharing while we're in the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And just that reminder of our how we have this opportunity to reach the highest consciousness we have inside ourselves, and how doing that helps the wheel of light continue. Yeah. So I appreciate that very much, how you've shared things, and thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Happy to do that. We have little tiny baskets in our museum, the size of a sand grain. Literally, they're baskets. And in my interpretation of that, that's the same thing as Yeshua the Christ said, what I do, you can do too, and more. And so basically, the woman, the shaman who made those little baskets is demonstrating infinite human potential. And I think we all have that within us, and not to doubt the power of our words and our compassion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Al, and I really appreciate the perspective that you offer. As you know, I just had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and just how the day-to-day can wear us down, the darkness of the day-to-day. So, taking that perspective, the perspective that you offer, really can be helpful in, stepping back and focusing in and developing what's really, really important. So thank you very much. And your flute carries so much of the message.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Al. It's really wonderful to hear your flute and your perspective. Take a minute and just breathe in the beauty of that moment. And then we'll welcome Peter Fairfield. Peter Fairfield is a doctor of Oriental medicine and a licensed acupuncturist. He's a medical intuitive and a teacher of Asian medicine for over 50 years. He specializes in meditation, qigong, and transformational practices with a focus on Asian medical psychiatry and spiritual opening. For 7 years, he operated a clinic in a Tibetan town in Nepal, and he learned from many powerful lamas and yogis using advanced techniques of pulse diagnosis. Peter was able to study the effects of their spiritual practices, and he's done retreats in the Himalayas, China, and India. And those experiences are incorporated into his clinical work and writing. He was an acupuncturist at the Esalen Institute, and he also toured with Pink Floyd. He founded an acupuncture school where he works to relieve trauma and to rewire clients for the creative and inspiring life they want to live. His brand new novel, Deep Into the Fire, is available at deepintothefire.com. So welcome, Peter, and here we are. Unmute, you have to unmute so we can hear you. That would be really wonderful.
There we go. Well, thank you, Lucy and Jürgen and everybody for showing up. It's a rainy Saturday morning here, so it's a nice day to commune inside and connect our hearts. Since I only have half an hour, and what I'd like to do is there's a mudra where we put all of our fingertips together, and this unites all of the meridians and the organs in the body. And then I would like you to feel that your heart, the energy from your heart, fills the place within your fingers. And I want you to feel a group unity. So there's not just me talking in the next half an hour. It's the needs of all of us, what we all want to hear and know, and focus in on the time and the day and what the world needs us to bring forth and put forward. Okay. So I've been a healer since a little boy. I've been a doctor of Chinese medicine for almost 50 years. My focus is on trying to figure out what helps personality, what spirituality is, and how to make that a practical thing. And since this is about ancestors, I think it's important to talk about time. In a quantum world, in a world where we understand non-duality is a foundation rather than material substance, there is no time. That means everything in our consciousness is available to our consciousness in any instant. We don't have past lives, we have simultaneous lives. We don't have ancestors in the past, we have influences that affect us through our physical stream of genetics And also there are levels of connection that have to do with more pure consciousness. And we are at the effect of these influences. As a doctor of Chinese medicine and practicing other things, I discovered that you can feel in the pulse. Usually I can describe the personality of someone's parents, sometimes the grandparents, sometimes a caregiver. And the primary influences that affect us stimulate us. What I've discovered or was shown, our karma imprints into the physical body based on the bonding of our parents. We have a polarity that runs up the spine. We have one that runs up the front, kind of creates a polarity. When we have a same-sex parental deficit, in other words, a little girl with a mom, little boy with a dad, the energy moves forward, and we become softer, more pliable, more intuitive, but less direct. When we have an opposite sex primary bonding deficit, a little boy with his mom, little girl with a dad, we become more linear, more cerebral. Our boundary is external, and obviously we want to have both. But this imprint from the parental bonding deficit is how our karmic path, our educational schedule for this lifetime gets imprinted into the physical body. From this fundamental alignment, we begin to be susceptible to certain psychological, emotional, pathological influences. And so it's what sort of guides us. I always say that old souls, first you get screwed up, then you get healed, then you help others. And so with the formats that I work with, it's fairly easy to undo these fundamental imprints and begin to free up people, humans. And in my understanding, the human being is from two influences. We have a genetic or momentum of our ancestors, which is our main focus today, that comes up through the kidneys in Chinese medicine and Tibetan medicine, Vedic medicine, and so forth. And then we have our spiritual connection that comes down through the crown, down through the centers into the heart. And then it's the unity of the heart and the kidneys through our ancestors that makes the whole human. So it's very possible to go in and feel the effect of our ancestors. Some months ago, I was working with a woman who's very, very talented, and she was going back into my ancestry, and she says, "You've got a grandmother Hattie that was so judgmental, it's affecting you today." Well, I'd never heard of a grandmother Hattie. So my grandfather was interested in genealogy, and he had the whole family lineage back to 800 AD or something. And I found I did have a grandmother Hattie. And so I went into meditation. I went back through the genetic tracks, which we can all do, and I can help people do that. I found this judgmental influence of my grandmother Hattie, and I sent love and clearing through that. And it made a shift in my life. There was a way that I could accept myself more, that I was less judgmental, less protective, less on edge a little bit. So we have these influences that are phenomenal. They're in the way that all animals or mammals, actually all beings, have a certain love for our offspring. We protect them. Sharks, manta rays, spiders, everybody seems to love their kids. Now, there is a personality shell, I think that Eckhart Tolle calls it the suit of pain, which interferes with this, what the Buddhists call our bodhisattva, our Buddha nature that loves. And when we go back into our ancestors, I've had a lot of people say, well, I don't want to feel the negative energy from my mother, father, grandfather, or whatever that is. But as we get into the pure state of awareness, what we find is that there's a momentum of love, concern, help that comes from all of our ancestors if we open to it. Not the crazy personality of Aunt Harriet and Uncle Fester or whoever it is that we meet at Thanksgiving sometimes. But there's a momentum from our ancestors that is strong and knowledgeable. Before my father, there were 13 generations of ministers in my family. And I was working with a woman who had 72 personalities one time, and she had been born into a satanic cult, and there was a great deal of extracorporeal influences in her. And I was working with some of these negative influences that were very powerful. And all of a sudden I felt all my grandfathers, all 13 generations of my grandfathers that were men of God, their wives were women of God. I felt them on my shoulders, giving me strength to fight and stand up to this powerful negative influence. And so that wasn't unusual for me, and I think for many people, but many people feel their loved ones, their child, their mother, their father, grandfather, special people, teachers in our lives that come to us at various times. This is a real thing. And it's possible to feel this connection in our meditation, in our daily life. And we have to remember that it's okay. Well, what Al mentioned when he talked, I forget who that was, that said, how are things going? He said, everything's just like it's supposed to be. I think we have to remember that, especially in this time of political chaos and so forth. We have to remember what's sustainable. What's happening now is not sustainable. So even though it's difficult to go through it and see how things change and be unsure of what's happening, it's not sustainable. What is sustainable is the connection to where we come from, connection to these primal roots that have to do with our personality, our spiritual path, the strength of our ability to go forward, and the limitations on us and the ability to break through these limitations. I want to read something here. I wrote this during COVID. I'm going to eliminate the section about COVID particularly, but this is what I wrote. We are not powerless. We have intelligence and life, and a life force and a consciousness and a will that will instruct our immune systems and our consciousness to survive and prevail. Desire life with all your heart. Unite with the forces of nature, sunlight, pure food, medicines from the earth. Dive into the hurt and pain and disappointments you carry inside and let them go. Find love in nature and humanity. Take it in like air, breathe it in deep. You will live and even find happiness. Welcome death when it comes. Welcome life before and after that. The universe is a giant, swirling, and infinite complex that has to have balance or it would fly away. That balance means that forces that are sustainable continue, forces that are not sustainable do not continue. They wobble and break apart. So I'd like to talk a little bit for the last few minutes here about how to connect to our ancestors, how to begin to do that. But we have, in order to do that, sometimes we have to trust where we are, how we are, who we are, and remember that things are okay. God or the infinite, however you want to call it, loves everybody. No matter how weird somebody is, they do have a Buddha nature, a Christ consciousness deep inside their core. I actually have a book about that. And so there is this basic goodness that we forget to see in people, because sometimes the outer core, the karmic layer, the suit of pain is so encrusted, it's hard to see that person is hidden inside this suit of pain again. So if we go in and we breathe into our abdomen, feel the breath down to the pubic bone. When you're doing low abdominal breathing, if we can get the breath all the way down to the pubic bone and feel that stretch, that switches us over to parasympathetic, which means we are now connected to all of our body. If you do low abdominal breathing, don't get down that deep. It's very hard to get fully in that way. And so we begin to connect to all of our organs. And then just allow yourself to connect back. And there's a lot more details on it, but this is the simple way. And ask yourself, who do I need to pay attention to in my past? Parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts, uncles, so forth. And begin to see who shows up. Our mind, our energy field, our brain, our consciousness is designed to do these things. It's just like discovering extra channels on your TV. We often don't realize that we have all this there. We do. We can connect to almost anything in the universe. I say almost because a lot of things we can't even conceive of. But it's all there in our presence. We connect to your heart, connect to your body, let go, find space and silence. And then just allow things and information and knowledge and guidance to just come to you. And I think many of us have experienced deep guidance from spiritual sources. Many of us have teachers on the other side, have guidance from the other side. If we allow that to be a possibility, you can experience that. You can feel the guidance. You can get direct information. Things happen in the physical that are very clear, and that helps us hold a space to connect to our ancestors, connect to the deep love before us in seeming time, but not really time, that supports us and nourishes us with knowledge, strength, power, and how to be, where to be, and when to be. It's amazing the tools that we have that we don't acknowledge. We forget it's there. We live simple lives. We get up, have a cup of coffee, have a piece of toast, watch the news, go to work, or do whatever we do, and we forget that there's magnificent possibilities just in the space between the thoughts, just in the silence, just in the power of the infinite. We have immense possibilities. We just have to remember it's all there. I know. I have a dear friend who has a very complicated BMW, and half of the controls on it, she doesn't know what to do with. The car drives fine anyway. But we have these same things. We have these accessories that are right there. And we just remember to try them and look around, see what's there, experiment, talk to other people. And we find we have so many possibilities. We have so much going for us. We have such good and such profound opportunities. So when we go back to the ancestors, we are doing two things. We're clearing obstructions that the ancestor didn't clear, and we're opening ourselves up to wisdom and knowledge, purpose, and energy. This is our birthright. This is the way the universe works. This is the nature of life, continuous supporting of life, the continuous beauty and the power. And sometimes we have a dark day, and sometimes life is so difficult, and sometimes we turn on the news or talk to a friend or get a call, and life just seems so hard. How can we go on? But if you watch those days, the next day or two, or shortly after that, there'll be something deeper, because you've released something. You've released a bubble of darkness inside you. So welcome those difficult days. Welcome the tough times when you question even your reason for living, because that's the darkness is being released, because our intrinsic being is goodness. It's hard to see that sometimes in the world. But I've done pulse diagnosis, maybe 30 or 40,000 people. I don't know, a lot of people. And there's this intrinsic being inside. It's the nature of most of our spiritual teachings have to do with this intrinsic being that's beyond of time. Because as we connect to ourselves, we connect to the universe. You can call it God, you can call it the infinite nature, whatever. I call it the universe. And so that is supportive. And our ancestral links are connected in that infinite place of being. So let's just take a minute, feel our hearts, let ourselves go back and connect to all that has come before us in the material aspect of time. And let any messages from our ancestors, either things we have to work on or things they want to help us with, or just experience them. This huge family that's come before us. Let yourself just take that in. Feel a powerful wave just coming through you of knowledge, of opportunity, of strength, connection, light. This wonderful place. And as I remind you today, I hope some of you will remind me tomorrow, because it's easy to find a moment when we forget that. Does anybody have any questions?
There are some questions. Well, there's a comment from David, an opening to our descendants as well, back to the future.
The descendants is a wonderful way to think about it, because again, it seems like a time, because time needs matter. So as soon as you get into pure consciousness, there's no matter. But it means that the more we clarify ourselves, the more that we find our own heart, the more that we begin to trust in the craziness of the world, that it's really okay, then that's a frequency and a tone that our offspring, either from our own blood or from the world, can begin to remember and take in. when I grew up as a child of post-World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and all that, there was a great need for some sort of inner contact. There was nothing in the culture. So most of my friends were interested in spiritual things or LSD, whichever way you wanted to go. My son doesn't have that. He doesn't have that angst about living. And so gradually we're having conversations, and gradually as I grow and evolve, and he's picking that up without even realizing it. So preparing ourselves as an offering to the future I think is one of the greatest offerings that we can have.
Peter, the question from Dawn is, are you saying that consciousness is all physical process?
How many days do we have here?
Oh, we can continue the conversation at
You have time to explain.
Okay, consciousness is, and as humans, our brain, our mind, our body is like the telephone or the radio or the television. We can tune in to consciousness through the vehicle that our body and our being. So the evolution of humanity or animal forms, because animals are certainly very conscious, really is the receiver and the interpreter and the manipulator of pure consciousness. So consciousness exists without matter, I believe, but it's matter that takes matter to sort of look back at itself. Perhaps, yes.
Can you please repeat the part about parental deficits?
Yeah, okay. So the bonding experience with both parents, and it's equally important with the father and the mother. You know, I was surprised at that. When I looked at people with father deficits or mother deficits, the father plays an equally important role, even if the father's missing or absent. Sometimes there's a great love coming from the distant father, but that's a whole complication. When we have an opposite sex parental deficit, and that means the parent is gone physically, emotionally, working too hard, highly judgmental, angry, alcoholic, something that keeps them out of the pure heart space. So when we have, so I'm calling that a bonding deficit, this is so common in the world, at least the world I live in. The opposite sex deficit goes to the spine, which is more linear, more cerebral, external boundary. You see like corporate women with helmet hair and these gold earrings, strong. Or men, you find men that are kind of macho. And the opposite, when you have a same-sex bonding deficit, the energy comes to the front, and there's a softness there. There's an intuition. It's the feminine side. You can feel things, but it's something that's not very direct to express it or to get that out into the world.
Okay, Jen has a question.
Let me just finish for 1 second.
Oh, okay.
So obviously we want both. We want to be able to be clear and erect, and we want us to be sensitive and connected. So we have both, and then what happens is in evolved being, we have a non-dual space inside us where we rest. And depending upon the need of our life and our karma and our path, we can move forward or back in our polarity to be with the situation that life is calling us to be in. And it's very easy to undo these fixed patterns in therapy. That's what I've been working to do. Yes, Lucy.
So Jen says she supports young people with cancer as a death doula. And any words of wisdom for them about their fear of death?
What a difficult situation.
Yeah.
I have talked to a lot of dead people. Maybe my lithium's wearing off or something. I don't know, maybe it's a flashback from the 60s. But I was in meditation once, and I have a cousin in Memphis who's been a chief of police in a lot of little towns, and his wife who passed on from 10 years before came to me in meditation, go, will you please tell Champ that the key's in the back of the blue drawer? So I called my cousin, who's, he appreciates me, but we're a little different sides of the fence. I said, Champ, I know this is weird, but Shelley called me and said the key's in the back of the blue drawer. And he goes, well, thanks, Pete. We've been looking for that. They're from Tennessee. So, and I've gotten so much, teachers that have passed, all kinds of people that have passed, I've had conversations with. So there's been enough verification in the physical world that death is a moving between rooms or moving between realities, but what lives is consciousness. And so I guess I would say I have not been really confronted with many little kids that are dying. What a difficult thing to face. Follow your heart, be who you are. Trust that the universe is a loving universe. Trust that there's guidance on both sides and that you will be loved no matter where you are, who you are. That's where I would start.
So several people have asked if Peter does work, and he does, and you can contact him through his email. We'll put it on the chat, and he is in Sonoma, California. So
most of my work right now is actually on the phone with people all over the world.
But mostly he works on the phone.
I'm happy to see people in person, but I think actually for the kind of work we're talking about, it's very effective on the phone, and I'm happy to help anybody and talk to somebody. So please, you can Google me or look me on Facebook. I'm all those places.
So one more question. I have a question just for clarity about something regarding the dark days. Peter said to see that as darkness moving out of us and or in
moving out in general.
Out in general. So this is from Laura.
Again, in my experience, I've been a professional healer for 50 years. There is a Buddha nature inside. It's the basic core of Buddhist teachings, and Christianity teaches Christ consciousness and so forth. It's hard to see. We see so many people that are highly obscured and angry and malicious and all that. But if you understand, again, I'll use this word pseudo-pain because Eckhart totally describes it so well, that deep inside everybody is this Buddha nature. And if you can see them as a terribly wounded person, obscuring the goodness inside them, just that consciousness alone has a chance to bridge and connect that person to that place inside them that is a Buddha, that does have loving nature. And so it's so hard to do that. People are cheating you or angry at you or attacking you or mean or doing things to other people. It's so hard to keep that view. But if we can step back and realize that deep inside that person, they're so wounded, and just if we can keep that in our consciousness, that I believe and have seen that it touches the consciousness of those that are so wounded. It's the heart of compassion. Compassion is not forgiving people for terrible acts. Compassion is realizing that those acts were created by pain and disconnection. So rather than condemning the soul or the essence of that person, realize that the actions are terrible. We never want to make those actions good, but realizing that they're done by a terribly wounded person. Having that in our minds, it changes how we see the world. It changes how we see terrible people. And I believe it changes how we interact with that reality and brings us back to what's real and possible in our own being.
Well,
thank you for this opportunity to say all that, and I appreciate that. Stuff came through me today that I know had to do with a lot of you. Anyway, thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Peter. We really appreciate you bringing in that perspective and some of the elements of the Chinese medical system and the the Tibetan medical system that has been integrated into your work is very important. We have a couple more minutes. I was just thinking you might say a little bit about what your work was like when you were in Nepal, working in a clinic there.
Well, it was my clinic. I had a house and I had a room with a few beds, and people would come. And the thing was very interesting to me. In Chinese medicine, I've always been interested in pulse diagnosis. When I saw a face in a meditation one time, and I was basically led to that face by lamas in Taiwan who had his face, and they took me to Nepal to meet him. That was my teacher. Very lucky. And when I first took my teacher's pulse, there was a quality I just couldn't understand. It stopped my mind. And eventually I found it in several other lamas, even some Westerners. And I realized that was this unobstructed Buddha nature. And so once I got that, it changed my whole thinking about spiritual teachings or medicine. That the whole idea was really to uncover this innate purity that's existent in people and animals and everybody. I mean, it's the nature of consciousness, is where the universe connects to us. I have a book out that's called Deep Happy. I wrote about 10, 12 years ago, and it's about connecting to this place inside us where the universe communicates to us. And so when I was in Nepal having that experience, I got to take the pulse of many great, famous lamas and teachers, and I had the same experience studying in China and India and many places. And you could begin to see what practices did what to what personalities. And so you begin to see that there's non-duality practices, there's practices that clear the channels, there's practices that sort of dump out this dark place that I was talking about. And so you begin to see the purpose and the power of some of these practices. I think some of the practices are not well taught. I think a lot of the modern teachers, I've been kind of disappointed that I haven't really felt the energy from them as I did their previous reincarnations. I think that things are moving too fast now, and the importance and the depth of very intense practice is lost. And I think it's something that the world's moving so fast. And so I got to treat people from all over the world that came to study with the lamas in this holy place in Nepal, in Bodhanath, where we live. And what was interesting to see the unity of people that were seeking a meaning, that were seeking a spiritual relevance, that were seeking a place where their heart could be in the world and not be shattered by the things that seemingly were more important. And so that was a powerful experience. Eventually I left because I realized that they didn't need me there. They needed me more here. And I came back to the States. And I treasure those years I had there, and it was powerful shaping. I was very lucky.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for all that you had to offer today. We'll take a few minutes. We'll take a few minutes now just to take a break, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. Luckily, we're running a little tiny bit ahead of schedule, which is very unusual, but we'll have more time for our panel discussion at the end. So
what time is the panel discussion?
At the after at 11:30, we're going to have the presenters, the 3 presenters from the morning, to talk with each other. So thank you. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back for John's presentation. So that would be
let's take maybe a 15-minute break.
Till 10:45.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, everybody, thank you. Greetings. Welcome back. Welcome back to the circle that we're creating here today. I'd like to bring on Laura. Laura, are you here?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
There you are. Yes. Our next presenter will be John Cantwell, and Laura will introduce him.
Yes, I'm here to introduce the lovely Sean, or John Cantwell. He's joining us today from Ireland, all the way from Ireland, where they just had some record storms and hurricane winds. So I feel very fortunate that you can be with us today. John is a shamanic healer and teacher in the indigenous Irish and Celtic traditions. He and his wife, Karen Ward, founded and direct a school out of Ireland called Slí An Chroí, Pathway of the Heart, where they offer teaching and mentoring in the original Irish, Celtic, indigenous Druidic tradition. John and Karen are also well-known and sought-after holders of this Irish Celtic tradition, both in Ireland and beyond. Along with teaching and healing work, they speak and lead ceremony and pilgrimage across Ireland and even outside of Ireland. John is also an active member of the Society for Shamanic Practice, where he leads ceremony and teaches as well. I can also attest that John and Karen are the loveliest of human beings. I am fortunate to be their student, so it's a real honor for me to have John here to speak with us today as part of this wonderful group of speakers. The first thing I always think of when it comes to John is beyond words. There's so much that can be experienced and learned from John just to hold space, be in space with him. One can feel the land and the ancestors and the holy ones that come along with them. And I've come to see him as actually kind of a world ambassador for the Irish and Celtic traditions. Among many other things that I appreciate about John, he seems to hold a special gift and ability for bringing the Irish and Celtic diaspora back with our roots, reuniting us with our roots, providing the healing and welcoming presence necessary in that process. I once heard a fellow student say to Sean that he's masterful in his ability to hold space, and I very much agree with that, and I think he's equally engaging as a teacher. So today, John will be speaking to us about the teachings from Ireland's original ancestors. And because today is also the Celtic festival of IMBOLC, he may be saying a few things about that as well. IMBOLC is the marking of the first stirrings of spring. So, Fáilte Sean, welcome. With our ears and hearts open, and on behalf of all of us, Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes.
Oh, Laura, tá de teanga ana yas. Míle Muilbukas, my Jeffrey Ushla. Thank you, my sister Laura. And so beautiful, the music of our first language on your lips. Thank you. So sweet for my ears to hear that. Macórja Ushla ar fud an down is Mishion. Banachti o Maya o Clia o Ilon Eru. In my first language, a privilege to be here. In Irish, my name is Sean. In English, John. I am very happy to respond to whichever you choose. And my greeting also was from our healing house here on this occasion on the East Coast in Dublin, and from the island of Éire. Of course, you'll be familiar with my homeland being referred to as Ireland. And Ireland, of course, the anglicization of our Irish name for the island, Éireann. But truly, the etymology of Éireann is so important for us because Éireann comes from Éire. And Éire was one of three sisters, three goddesses, three sisters, Éire and her sisters Banba and Fála. And one of our foundation mythologies here at home is that when the Celts first arrived on the island, they encountered the three sisters, in particular Éire. And they asked her, what should we call this place that we want to know as home? And she said, you call this place after me. And so, really, Ireland, Éireann, is the island of Eru. And Eru, in our mythology, is the goddess of sovereignty. And so really, I like to remind myself and anybody else who has the patience to listen to me that when you say the word Ireland, you're really saying goddess of sovereignty. And this is important as an initial sharing for me with you, because I'm so deeply respectful of the theme and the focus and the vision for this conference. Living in ancestral connection just doesn't get any more important for me as a shamanic human being, and I see that reciprocated in so many shamanic cultures worldwide. Living with our ancestors and living today, we as the ancestors of tomorrow. But for me, I would like to offer from the tradition of the Emerald Isle that it begins with the importance of sovereignty. And it's not for me to explain what sovereignty is, but I am called to hand it to you. That living without sovereignty is a profound psychic injury to all human beings. And I'm sure there's occasions perhaps where we feel I'm a sovereign human being. There may be other occasions in life where I don't feel sovereign or less sovereign. But sovereignty as a principle, I would like to share with you initially, because I refer to it and its absence as a psychic wound. Therefore, its presence is elixir of the psyche, elixir of the soul, to experience self as sovereign. And we live, many of us, in different cultures, different landscapes, different lands and continents with very different geopolitical histories. And the theft or the presence of sovereignty in the land where we live can be a topic of often very heated conversation and often very significant and important conversation. And my dream and my prayer for all who are gathering is not that you remember something I've said, but that you remember something that you feel, perhaps coming from what I'm saying and sharing, or some ritual or ceremony that I might bring in the time given to me with you, that you feel something, and that feeling touches something of your sovereignty. And of course, Ireland and our geopolitical history, our recovery of sovereignty is still quite fresh. We, of course, as many of you will know, have a colonial history in the last 1,000 years, where visitors to the island who arrived uninvited had a profound impact on our native culture, our native language, our native ways, our native education systems, our native legal systems, and more. And with that, of course, with a lot of colonial presence comes ethnic cleansing, land grab, and so forth. And so the privilege I have in my lifetime is to sit with you as an Irishman who is free. An Irishman who is free from the colonial shackles. And while not every one of our uninvited colonial visitors have left, indeed the island is now going through a very, very fierce remembering of sovereignty in all kinds of ways. Political, yes. Commercial, yes. But also spiritually. And what we're seeing in Ireland is a passionate remembering of who we really are and who we come from. And there is tremendous food for the soul when people do that, that we can have economic freedom, we can have political freedom, but finding real spiritual sovereignty in ourselves brings an experience of remembering, but also belonging and connection. And when we remember who we've come from, we can live in an experience of sovereignty so that we can live in ways that look after the descendants who will come after us, for of course we are the ancestors of tomorrow. And my sharing I offer coming from our first ancestors of this island. I have a good friend, an anthropologist, and she likes to remind me as I talk about ancestors, and she says, John, you do know that you have more ancestors than you can ever remember. And as an anthropologist, she will share that for one human being to be alive in 2025, the current research from the world of anthropology is that for one human being like me, like you, to be alive in 2025, the approximate number of ancestors that needed to have lived on this planet, the number of two-leggeds that needed to have lived for us to be alive individually, for one person to be alive in 2025, her research says that over 1 billion two-leggeds needed to have lived for you, for me, to have our life today in 2025. So beneath each of us, cascading to birth parents, for grandparents, and so forth, as that great pyramid expands and deepens beneath us, 1 billion, from Homo sapien, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, and more, 1 billion. And so how can we ask ourselves to know and respect all of our 1 billion ancestors? Well, it is important that we seek and have recordings of those who can be remembered by name. But of course, the respect we can give to the 1 billion can be from our hearts, from our souls. And in the Irish tradition, we have in our mythology much remembered lore of the first ancestors. And in our mythology, there are many stories, many waves of visitors that came to the island and had their impact for us. And there are stories, however, not just of races of people, such as when the Celts came and before the Celts, the Tuatha Dé Danann, which translates as the tribe of Mother Earth, and before the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Fir Bolg, the men with big bellies, the strict translation. But before all of those waves of visitors or invaders, it all started with two. And I'd like to briefly share something of those two original ancestors that's still remembered in our native mythology. And I'll bring up a contemporary artist's interpretation of these two ancestors. Her name, Cesar, or sometimes pronounced Kesser. His name, Fionn Mac Bócra. And I'll just speak of them as I bring up an artistic expression of them. And like all mythological stories, there are many versions of the same tale. However, briefly, to speak of the original two that gave rise to all who live on the island of Eru, that Cesar and Fionn arrived, as only you could in those days, to an island by sea. And they arrived on a small craft blown by the wind, and they landed on the southwestern shores of Ireland. And they found an island rich and covered in trees, an island rich in other plant life and animals. But as you can see, and the artist has remembered in some of the wording under their names, which you can see there, the artist remembered some aspects of the mythology, where our stories remembered speak of them both as shamanic human beings. In other words, they had an indigenous consciousness, an indigenous connection to all of life around them as they landed on the soil of Ireland. And in the myriad stories of Cesar and Fionn were, of course, the stories of how they looked after basic needs of shelter, finding water, finding food, growing food, bringing forward the next generation, and also finding relationship, not just with each other, for of course they became our first parents, but also finding relationship with all life around them. And in our stories of them, clearly our native mythology speaks that our original birth mother and birth father on this island were two shamanic human beings. And therefore, there's the invitation to be alive today in 2025 as one of their children, equally shamanic, and to live with the same passion and the same sensuous nature as Fionn and Cesar. And this story is very potent for those that come to us for gatherings or trainings in Ireland, but also very potent as myself and Karen, as Laura said, have the privilege over the last 25 years traveling the world and offering for those who are interested or have a resonance for the Irish tradition. And I want to invite really now the power of the original ancestors of Ireland to take over more from me and to take over for you. And in a way, for them to invite you, no matter what your ethnicity, no matter what the stories of migration for many of you that are taking part in the conference may indeed have stories of ancestors coming to the land where you live, on ships or boats on the sea. And it's important to see that this mythology I'm sharing of Ireland tells us, the Irish, that we come from two migrants. And we talk about belonging, we talk about sovereignty, we talk about the indigenous, and we talk about the importance of ownership of land. But of course, many of you will know that the indigenous consciousness cannot see land ever as being owned. But there is a sacred stewardship of land, which is different, a different contract. But the story of Fionn and Cesar for us Irish speaks that we need to remember, us Irish people, that we are the descendants of two migrants who were blown by the wind on their small sea craft towards the southwest of Bantry Bay in Ireland. And this may speak to many of you. And no matter how many decades or centuries your blood ancestors have been living on the land, perhaps where you're participating today, that in a sense it may be sincere for you to conceive that ultimately you too came originally from people who migrated. And therefore, in a sense, we are all visitors here. But like Fionn and Cesar, when they landed in a place, visitors, yes, but they sought sovereignty. And the sovereignty they sought came primarily by being sensuous. Sensuous. In the Irish tradition, the ancestors, we say, are in Tír na Mbeó, the land of the ever-living, our way of referring to the other world as a place where time is circular, where there is no past nor future, that all is now in the other world. And our ancestors, your ancestors, the Irish shaman will say, are all with you now. Those who were your birth parents, your birth grandparents, but also the earliest of those 1 billion ancestors beneath you are with you now. And in the Irish tradition, we say the veils between the worlds are often very thin, particularly at Samhain, the beginning of our native new year, the beginning of winter in early November. That's the cross-quarter day between autumn equinox and winter solstice. But the doorways, the veils to the other world, to the realm of the ancestors, can be as far away as the Pleiades, can be just at the tip of your nose, but the veils to the other world can also be within, in the internal organs of the body, particularly your heart. And hence the teaching from Fionn and Kesser to live a sensuous life. That in the stories of them finding shelter, finding water, finding food, they did so by giving themselves over not just to sight and to hearing, but to smell and to taste and to touch in nature. And this allowed a sensuous connection with all of life. And that sensuous way of living brought a sense of belonging and connection and a non-hierarchical place in all of life. And that sensuous way of life in Fionn and Kesser brought the experience that all of life is a circle. And so my advocacy is that we become sensuous and that we allow ourselves, even through an active imagination, to consider the two original ancestors that may be beneath that 1 billion that is beneath you and I today. And that life changes when we give ourselves the opportunity to live in 2025 with all of our histories and all of our stories, with all of the clutter and the noise and the drama and indeed the chaos of contemporary life. That we have also the invitation and the birthright, but perhaps also the resource for our own soul to awaken tomorrow as if we were the first. And to be in the world, no matter what our age and experience, with the wonder, the innocence, and the enchantment of the first who landed in the land where you live. And we call the Irish tradition Slí An Chroí, as you heard from Laura, which translates as pathway of the heart. And the way of the heart is, of course, a defining perception of the Irish tradition. Not that it dismisses the mind nor the body, far from it, but it does see primacy into a sovereignty that is our birthright, into a level of connection and belonging that comes with living from our first ancestors, as important but also available to us every morning that we awake. And that refreshment of us, of a sense of wonder, a sense of enchantment, a sense of innocence, a sense of pioneering living, but also in a sensuous recovery of our own indigenous nature. And perhaps if it's true that we asked to be incarnated in this lifetime, in a challenging era of environmental destruction, in where we're seeing the end game of so many ways of living that were spoken of as the only way to live. And we're seeing, of course, how endless growth is having its impact on humanity, on our environment. And if it's true we did choose to incarnate in this era, then perhaps the remembering of the indigenous nature in all of us is a critical step, not just for us, but for our descendants, for those who are coming after us. And yes, it's important that we look to those who we call Indigenous, to those we refer to as First Nation, of course, because they hold an extraordinary legacy and remembering spirituality. But I'm certainly seeing in the work I do in Ireland, in the international work that's possible now using online teaching and so forth, but when I get the opportunity to travel with Karen across the oceans, the importance of all of us, no matter who we are, of recovering an indigenous nature. And one of the powerful ways we see of feeding that is even imagining or conceiving of the two original ancestors that gave rise to all of your ancestors. And whether you have a creation myth, as I'm blessed to have in my native land and mythology, but even using, as I said, the active imagination. And the Irish tradition, has unfettered permission to be shared. And so if there's any resonance with what I'm sharing, or any resonance of hearing of Fionn Mac Bócra and Cesar, if there's any resonance, then please receive it and take it and hold it. I'm just going to glance at the linear time that's afforded me, and I'd like to set a sacred place now for all of us where I stop talking and I allow that original music of the heartbeat of Mother Earth through An Barón, the drum, to simply invite you to stop listening to the man in Ireland, but to allow the drum to bring you into a listening to your own heart, and to bring you into a sensuous experience of yourself, and allow you to see how that sensuous return to all of nature might be possible, or may be deepened and expanded if it's already established with you. But also to allow the drum to awaken in you, in the other world where all is now, that right before the tip of our nose can be the two primal ancestors of you and I. And if it helps to embrace and to grasp Fionn Mac Bócra and Cesar, please do. If they don't resonate with you, that's quite okay. It's no barrier to the two primal ancestors of your being can come forward as guides, as teachers, but also inspirations for us to live in the world as if we were the first. But also, as you heard from the story of Fionn and Cesar, they lived giving birth to the next generation. And this was a tremendous responsibility for them, for they knew, being the first two, that how they lived was of enormous inspiration, teaching and guidance to the next generation. And it's the same for us. And so, if you are comfortable, I'd like to bring you into a seminal ritual that we often bring in, of course, early in training in the Irish tradition, where we drop into our hearts, we drop into the drum, we drop into the heartbeat of Mother Earth, so that we can drop into finding the cells in our body that have their origin in the cells of the body of the first two primal ancestors of you and perhaps to simply place the flat palm of one hand either on your beating heart or perhaps in the center of your sternum, the cauldron of warming, we would say in Ireland, which of course is synonymous with heart chakra. And simply allow that open palm of a hand to bring you to a place in your body, in your life, in your being, highly prized in the Irish tradition. Your way of your heart. And if comfortable, gently closing your eyes. And allowing yourself a deep and soft, graceful inhalation. Breathing, feeling the rise in your rib cage and the softening and lowering of your rib cage as you exhale. Perhaps a second now, deep, graceful in-breath. And enjoying the lowering of your rib cage as you exhale. And holding your heart now with that hand upon your sternum. A final deep third breath. Breathing in, feeling the power and rise in your rib cage, your heart, and then gently exhaling. On the heartbeat of Anbauron, the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Trust your heart. Breathing deep into your heart, the beating drum in your body. Become alive now to what you are touching, your heart. Become alive to what you are hearing, heartbeat. Become alive now to the taste in your mouth. Come alive now to the scent in your nose. Let the heartbeat of the drum now carry you to a place of nature. Perhaps one familiar, perhaps new. Notice how you feel approaching, entering this place of nature. Let the drum now invite you to enter this place of nature as the first ancestor. Be alive in all of your senses in this place of nature as the first one. As a visitor here, how is this place of nature inviting you to belong? To be in connection? To be in relationship with all of life? How is this place of nature you, the first visitor? How is this place of nature asking you to live. What is this place of nature asking you to receive as the first one? What is this place of nature asking you to never forget? In this place of nature, grow into greater awareness of all that you can see, of all that you can hear, of all that you can taste, of all that you can smell, of all that you can touch, notice how you feel. Once again, closing your eyes, taking a deep breath in this place of nature. Taking a deep second breath in this place of nature. Taking a third deep breath in this place of nature. Become aware once again of the hand placed upon your heart or heart chakra. Letting go any tension or anxiety that you needed to make anything happen. Just simply be alive to how you feel. And my invitation to you, as is the invitation in my native tradition, is to awaken tomorrow as you are, in whatever chronological age you are, in whatever state of health you are, in whatever land, country, continent you are, in whatever language you use. To awaken tomorrow with all of your biographical history in place, with all of your biographical future in place, but also to awaken tomorrow in living embodiment of your first ancestors. And to be open to what happens when you do. In the sovereignty, as a visitor, finding belonging, connection. But knowing too, that if we did choose to be incarnated in this lifetime, that it's not any longer perhaps our greatest wisdom to leave it to others to carry the indigenous torch. Perhaps it's now become important that all human beings, no matter what our geopolitical history, on Earth, the indigenous being from which we've all come from. Mila mila buikas makorja. Tá an óhas orm. Bheith Malóthar le Céile sa Ceorcail Seo. It is a deep privilege for me to sit with you, and I honor the privilege I hold from my ancestors in whatever way I can to share their beauty, their power, and their wisdom. And I honor how you may hold or carry, in whatever way you do, the offering from my ancestors and my native tradition this day. Míle buíochas Macórdia. Mastery of linear time is not my forte.
Yeah.
I'm glancing down at the clock here in Ireland, which may or may not correspond with the clock in your land. But maybe there's time for some questions or comments. But as Laura said, February 1st is the fixed date of IMBOLC. IMBOLC strictly translates as in the belly. And this came from our ancestors seeing the swollen bellies of the ewes and the cows that would be born in spring, but also IMBOLC synonymous with Breed or Bridget as goddess or as saint. And we now celebrate her in a national public holiday on the day of true IMBOLC. And that is the exact cross-quarter moment between winter solstice and spring equinox. And that is Monday, February the 3rd, which this year is actually also the day of the public holiday. And that is the day of what we call true IMBOLC. And IMBOLC, as Laura said, the threshold of spring. And so for me to sit with you on that threshold, the winter we've lived, those of us in Northern Hemisphere, or the summer we've lived, those of us in Southern. And as we're crossing into the new season in the circular Celtic calendar this time, into spring on Arach in Northern Hemisphere, or into our autumn fall, those of us in Southern Hemisphere, to sit with you at that threshold and in the power of Bridget Breed, who is profoundly restoring the divine feminine in our culture here in Ireland, wonderfully so. That's made it very poignant for me, and I hope perhaps that finds you with the same poignancy at this time. Míle buíochas Macórdia.
Thank you so much, Sean. The feeling that we're on the threshold is something that is very profound and very important in terms of what we're doing today. I had an experience of going beyond any existence, beyond any patterns of who I am, but just being really connected with nature in a very open sense. And that was a very profound experience, in that we can start from there. It's like starting from the original source. If we can start from there, our sense of being is really transformed. So thank you so much for your presentation. We might have time. There's one question, which is from Don, asking if you're saying that we are all indigenous. It sounds to me like you're saying that.
If you will be patient with me, that I'm going to become relatively slow around answering that, because it's important that John or Sean on Shot, that I am not making that call. I'm sharing from my native tradition that the tradition asks us to remember an indigenous origin in all of us here in Ireland. And here I am speaking a foreign language. Here I am, a man in 2025 that was raised Catholic, a religion that never started in Ireland, started in the desert in the Middle East, that I have enormous personal biography that's influenced by so many energies, whether they're economic or lingual or religious, that are not indigenous to this island. And yet it's said, Don, or we will say here, Don, that any tribe that never forgets its mythology, no matter how colonized they become, any tribe that does not forget their mythology never loses their soul. And the importance for us in Ireland, those of us who take very respectfully our native shamanic tradition, the mythology speaks to us of the birthright to remember an indigenous nature. And I'm very aware of how this is a precarious conversation in different parts of the world. And I'm aware of how different people can hold different concepts of what it is to be indigenous. But I'm not going to personally make a call and say, yes, we are all indigenous. But I will share from my native mythology what I've shared today, which is that we have an opportunity, no matter who we are, to remember an indigenous origin and how that might resource us, teach us, guide us, perhaps restore a very critical consciousness, no matter what our ethnicity, what our geopolitical stories, what our personal or family biographies. At the same time, I will be of enormous, enormous respect for those that we do refer to in the world as indigenous, because they are holding a flag for many of us to respect, but also to remember in ourselves, not to become like other people, but to find our own indigenous spirit. Because if we don't, we all know in this particular moment in humanity's timeline that if we don't, if a critical mass don't, well, I think we know where that story is going to end. So that for me, Don, it's a conversation that isn't a purity conversation. It sometimes can be a lineage conversation, but I would just say that the times we live in are asking all of us to awaken to the indigenous human being that's deep within all of us. And I'm sharing from my native tradition that our first two ancestors speak of that way of being. And so I hope I have answered your question, Don, by not answering it. But I'm very curious to hear, how you might respond to that, Don, because I'm very aware that when I travel, I speak as somebody from a culture and a nation that are a couple of centuries ahead of recovery from colonial impact. And I'm very aware that that is an important conversation. If your land is freed from the invader, and if your land is not freed from the invader, that is of course important. But we are all, I think, seeing that the only way forward is together and in a circle. But I do wish to respect the journeys of other indigenous nations that perhaps haven't had the centuries of emancipation that we've had here in Ireland. And at the same time, I respect that Ireland is still in relatively early recovery, but that there is a very passionate remembering of indigenous nature here in Ireland at this time. And that's a great privilege for myself and my wife Karen and many, many others to be in the freedom of doing so.
Well, thank you. And that will kind of lead us into our discussion, our panel discussion, where the presenters from this morning will discuss with each other. Maybe I'd also like to bring in Elizabeth Kelly at this time. Are you there?
I'm here.
Yes. So Elizabeth, if you would like to reflect on what was presented this morning. And if you have something to add, this would be a really good time to do it. And then we'll go into a panel discussion with the presenters.
Oh, well, that's a lot. I mean, there was a lot of wonderful things said, and I'm really kind of in awe of the quality of the presenters, and I'm very grateful that I'm here to take this information in. For myself, I have to say, being an American and what the changes we are seeing in our country right now is very disturbing. And yes, I do have Irish ancestors. I carry the last name of Kelly. And but like many Americans, I'm mixed Italian and Irish. But aside from just saying that, I did a deep dive into this time period in bulk. I have had the opportunity to give multiple presentations coming from a diverse background. I also was brought up Catholic, but I have deep roots in the pagan tradition and the Gnostic Christianity tradition. And at this time, we celebrated, which I think is a beautiful festival, Candlemas. But really, the question I want to ask John is the relationship with Bridget. Bridget, I mean, I know she's thought of as the goddess of the well and fire and poets and creativity, but also smithcraft. So I'm finding it's potent for me anyways, that at this time with this beginning of this, it's almost like a new year. We're celebrating the year of the snake in the Chinese, and my area, San Francisco, is very strongly influenced by the Asian population. But I guess without running around too much, the point I want to get at that is it seems like we are waking up here in America as to what is happening with this new president and all of the changes that are taking place very rapidly. We are like in the blitzkrieg. We are all in shock and awe at how much is happening. So the question I want to ask is, knowing that Bridget is also smithcraft, which is, I mean, to me, it speaks to transformation, and we are in the midst of an intense transformation here. And how can we draw on the energies of Bridget to strengthen us as we witness all of that? So this is happening in almost we're blitzed, we're overwhelmed with what's going on, and how we can then best navigate and then use, do something supportive and useful at this time. Maybe it's remembering that we as Americans are all coming from somewhere else. We're all indigenous people en route to resettle immigrants. So I don't know, John. I mean, that's maybe I put out a lot, but maybe you can navigate in your wisdom, the need for some way to hold this. I mean, I'm actually quite upset at what's going on. So
can we open this question up to John and to the other presenters?
Oh, sure. But it was the smithcraft or the transformative element of Bridget at this time, which is the kind of the foundation. But yes, anyone who wants to jump in, because it is a loaded time for us.
Yeah, thank you. John?
Thank you, Elizabeth. You know, smithcraft is really interesting for me, and I spend a lot of time with blacksmiths because certainly in the Irish tradition, which is Celtic, but also profoundly pre-Celtic, there's a great synchronicity between the blacksmith and smithcraft and the alchemy that's understood to be in the faculties of the shaman. And you know, there is so much lore around Bridget in her pre-Christian archetypal persona as goddess, and there's so much lore in the Christian version of Bridget, but beyond her pagan presence or her Christian presence, there certainly is in Bridget at this time of spring's beginning the inspiration to not try and change the world. And yet she was a source of extraordinary change in Ireland. But the change she brought about was not, you know, through campaigning or becoming political, but was becoming the embodiment of the change and creating community for her monastery. And I'll say again, for a female deity in a Christian frame to have a monastery, you would expect me to say convent. But she, you know, in her Christian lore, formed a monastery that was populated by both men and women. And in a sense, she was a community creator of how life can be and realizing potential in the face of enormous threat from other parts of the country and from places beyond the oceans and seas. And to live with a complete focus and dedication for how it can be in the face of change, in the face of threat, in the face of resistance. And that for me is one of the foremost inspirations of Breed or Bridget, is that she was unstoppable in living the way she wanted to live and inviting others to do likewise, not to become followers of her, but to become followers of the same principle in themselves. And in terms of the chemistry or the alchemy that I think is, for me, very much synonymous with Bridget, and for me it's no surprise she's an archetype of a new season, because in our Celtic circular way of living throughout the 4 seasons, there are 8 Celtic festivals, the 2 solstices, the 2 equinoxes, but then the 4 cross quarter days, the very important transition times into winter, our first season, our new year, into spring, which is now, into summer, and of course autumn, fall. But those 8 Celtic festivals ask us who follow this tradition to die and to be reborn 8 times a year. And in a sense, the pressure and the intensity that's happening geopolitically where you live, and believe me, there are similar events happening in Europe, and of course they're all rippling and finding many people, that there is something in the chaos or the pressure or the intensity of how we're being asked to face is that it's a request, particularly at this transition time from winter into summer. But even if it wasn't there in our culture, it still would be in the transition from one season to the other, that some part of us now is being asked to be let go, to die. And the pressure we're feeling may also actually be medicine, inviting us to awaken to what part of me needs to be let go. That if I keep carrying this part of me, it's going to be counterproductive for how the new season is asking me to be reborn. But I think, coming back to Bridget, Elizabeth, I feel it's so much about that if we die to ourselves and be reborn into ourselves, so that we transition from being a winter being into a spring being, that really the force of Bridget is saying is to become more like yourselves, but in the face of perhaps enormous pressure or threat around you, is to be fearless, to be the embodiment of life as you see it. And certainly, you know, Bridget has that lasting influence from not setting out to change or to be directive in the world, but to be the embodiment of herself. And as I said, in her monastery, bringing in others to be the embodiment of themselves. But she never started a movement. She started an awakening of potential and power, but also passionate living that was full of craft and industry and creativity. But lastly, Elizabeth, I can't forget that Bridget in Ireland is also the patron saint of beer. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so now I would like to open up our discussion to the panel. Is Al and Peter?
I'd like to make a comment, if I may.
Yes, please.
There are important prophecies in the Western Hemisphere that apply to the time that I spoke of and that I think that we're all alluding to. And one of them I've spoken about before to different groups is called the prophecy of the eagle and the condor. And other traditions might have some other names for the same concept. But basically the eagle representing the northern hemisphere, the masculine surviving energies and related kinds of themes, and the condor representing the southern hemisphere, the heart energies or the Sophia, the nurturing energies. And the prophecies refer to if we reach a certain point in time in humanity on the earth, the two birds will fly together in harmony, indicating the rebalancing of the earth, the masculine and the feminine, and all energies that are viewed in the survival and the nurturing energies. And so we have reached the point in time, that was 2012, which is said to be the center of the transition, the middle of the transition. So they also say that there's no going back after that point. The transition begins, and the chaos is what we're seeing. And with the higher consciousness in this history of the earth, we will unfailingly go into the better times. And humanity will begin to see that more collectively, in the years 2030 or so. But we're going through that process. There is a more explicit comment by a Chumash shaman near the Santa Barbara area in California that said, we have seen the wave of destruction that has come from the east, but like a tsunami, it has now hit the west coast and will wash back now. But that wave that washes back will be one of healing and compassion. And that's a hint of the new times. And even further in the prophecies, Rolando Paucar, the Inca shaman that I mentioned earlier, in their history, they talk about an honoring or recognition of some sort of their colonizer and his people, Pizarro. And people were confused about why they acknowledged him as such an important figure. And he says, Ronaldo said, we didn't recognize him for what he did, which was horrible. We recognized him for what he represented. And that was the fact that little brother and sister were going to start coming across the water from the east. And those hints and stories and prophecies are in the northern parts of the Western Hemisphere all the way down to Patagonia in the south. So at some point, people had to come across the waters, and we had to meet each other and share the stories. And that's why I mentioned earlier, there is an audience now that wants to know and appreciate the history of humanity on the planet, and that it is going to be better. So that's what the indigenous prophecies of the Western Hemisphere say, as far as I've learned.
Thank you, Al. That's Peter, would you like to comment on the discussion? Or Sean, would you like to comment on the prophecies that Al's talking about?
Peter has his sound off.
Oh, I can see. Peter, where's Peter? You need to unmute.
Yeah, I would like to say something. I probably won't be as eloquent as Al or John, but again, you know, we have to think in terms of balance. And the political system in America has been very unconscious and contained and cemented for a long time, and rigid, and the liberals have assumed one thing, and they became very disconnected, and I was always a liberal until COVID. Then I realized there was something missing. I think we can realize that what's coming out now is a very unconscious emotional part, a very unconscious emotional voice that's speaking to a lot of people that have not felt heard for a long time. I think that there'll be a great disappointment in their expectations. Already in the first 11 days, I think that Trump has done things that are not sustainable. And sustainable was a word I used in my talk. And so I think we just have to wait it out. You know, like if we see a boil coming out of our body, that's actually a healing. If we have a big emotional release, that's actually a healing. And I think we can just assume that the unconscious nature that's happening in our government right now and the world is just these dark places kind of emerging to be replaced by an inner purity. I think America has a powerful destiny. That there's a momentum of something that America has done in the world. I think we've lost a lot, but I think it's still intrinsic to our country. Not that we are better, but we are a voice in the world that I think is worth happening. And it will take sustainability to succeed in the system right now that I don't believe has sustainability. So I think there's hope, but I think it requires a certain amount of patience and curiosity to see what the fuck is happening here. Pardon the language, but it's so remote from any expectations that I've had or expected from our country that I think we have to trust and keep aware and pay attention, I think, and trust that it's not sustainable. So anyway, that's my uneloquent comment.
Okay, do you have something to add to that, John?
As somebody who's Irish, and while I have so many people belonging to me living around the world, as so many Irish people do, I am, of course, you know, speaking from a great distance here, but in listening, and you know, it's a conversation that I'm hearing from so many people in the Americas and Canada that were in contact with myself and Karen at this time. And indeed, you know, what's happening in mainland Europe is, you know, not too far from all of your reference points. When I talk about my privilege of being able to be a free man, you know, I could not practice how I practice today, nor could Karen, certainly. Myself and Karen were the first people to put a placard up on the railings of a public building not far from where we live here in Dublin. A placard that spoke of a centre for healing that said Irish shamanism. And we know of no other people, this was now in the 90s, who had done that. And there weren't very many centers for shamanic practice. But if there were, they weren't using that word, and they certainly weren't putting it in public on the railing of a building. And we felt we had to honor the generations and generations of ancestors, many of who suffered unspeakable horrors, and our native culture having to go underground for centuries because of the threat inflicted by our colonial visitors. And so the freedom we have today is enormous, but really what I want to refer to is how I can be a living embodiment generations later following unspeakable horror. And something can survive. Something beautiful can survive. And I'm not calling myself beautiful, but I am calling my tradition beautiful. In a meaningful way. And how that can survive. And the great fortune we have is that we must, us Irish, revere what was endured over many centuries with extraordinary force and dedication by the colonists. And I suppose I just want to share this because I'm not asking you to have a concept of hope. I'm not asking you to have a false hope, but I am speaking as a legacy and an embodiment of hope that maybe would have been impossible in Ireland 300, 400, 500 years ago. But even 50 years ago, two people like myself and Karen could not have hung that placard in public without being chased out of town. And yes, that chase is returning, as many who are, what are called in the right wing of political mentality are now beginning to speak about targeting those who promote nature worship, so that that threat, may in a sense not have completely gone away. But to have a relationship with hope, even when we become hopeless, or hope just seems to be an impossible experience. But when you do not forget, and as I said, we say in Ireland, when a tribe doesn't forget its own mythology, it never dies. So no surprise when a colonial power that comes from without or within tries to destroy a native mythology, because once you do that, that's it, it's over for that tribe. They have lost memory. And is to hold on to your origin stories, is to hold on to your personal mythology that is meaningful to you, and to not give up in uncovering the personal myth that sustains you and brings you sovereignty, no matter what the swirl of chaos around you. That is just so important, but that by doing so, you may have an impact that is the embodiment of hope in this generation or in future generations, because that hope had to be alive somewhere during the darkest days of Irish history for somebody in 2025. And there are many, many others similar to myself and Karen in Ireland at this time, remembering our native ways. We have to be the blossoming of a hope that may have looked like it had evaporated hundreds of years ago. But once a tribe decides to not forget the mythology that sustains them, that is so meaningful.
Can we invite Don in? I think he had a question because we're getting very close to our linear time here, and I want to make sure that we hear all the wonderful voices that are with us today.
I just heard some answers to their own questions. I mean, Elizabeth talked about coming from a source of strength, and I think that's what it's about, and using those strengths. I heard the other term from Sean was about resistance. And then they talked, yes, about he said origin stories, but it's going back to I remember, and I will say this in my talk, stories are our theory, going back to what we believe and what we know and using that to give us hope. And I think with who was it, Peter, yeah, and both Al talked about balance. So it's a matter of seeking that balance, and that's what and you also mentioned chaos theory, and we know from chaos theory that it is about seeking that balance. So there's I see the responses that they're answering, providing some ways for us to look at building off of our strengths, going back to what we believe and what we know, and using that in our process of hope, and looking at bringing things back to balance. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to each one of you that has participated this morning. We're getting close to the end of our morning session, and I would like to encourage people as we go into our break to reflect on what we'll call the seeds of wisdom that we've gathered here this morning from our presenters and from the ancestors, and to reflect on how we can plant them in ourselves and create the roots for our future generations. And if you have some thoughts that come to you, some intentions of how that might happen for you, if you want to share them in the chat, that would be really wonderful. And if you want to know anything more about these presenters, and if you have ideas of ways that we can continue this discussion, you can find that information on our website. So as we go out, I'm going to ask Jana to take us out. We'll meet back here at 2 o'clock, and ask Jana to take us out with some drumming.
Lucy, could I just mention I won't be able to attend the afternoon, but I'd welcome any contacts through my website or phone. Or
yeah,
contacts.
so that's, some people won't be able to be here in the afternoon, but I think it would be wonderful to create ways that we can continue this dialogue. And Dawn, in the afternoon, Dawn will be giving presentations with Greg, and
I would be open to any personal discussions with anybody.
The websites are all listed on the website, so feel free to contact any of the presenters.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your presentations and the seed of hope that is in the remembrance and in the acknowledgement of where we are coming from. Thank you all.
Jana?
Thank you, Lucy. I'm just going to drum for each of you, all of us around the world. I'm sorry, Lucy, did you say something too? Okay. I'm just going to drum with great privilege on behalf of all of you until every last person signs off.
you guys want to skip ahead to the audio comparison, feel free to do that. I'll put the times in the video description below. But other
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jana, for drumming, closing the circle.
Thank you. It's my privilege.
See you in the afternoon, we hope.